Yeah, so my name is Adam Binks. I am the Senior Recruitment Manager at KPMG here in New Zealand. So look after three components of the recruitment process. So number one is our graduate program, which intake would be around about 120 graduates and interns each year across 7 offices. Also responsible for recruiting all of our experienced people as well. So that's about 250 hires every single year. And then the third bit is we're really lucky that at KPMG we get to go overseas and experience some other KPMG offices globally. So I look after what we call global mobility. I think if I talk about the assessment centre that we run, there's a number of components. The first component really is an ability for you to hopefully relax a little bit in an informal setting. So as always, start with a lunch so that you get to meet some of the people that are going to be around you from KPMG during the course of the day. The second component is that you will then get a really good briefing on what to expect from the activities during the day, and then you'll go straight into those. You'll roll straight into those. The first of which is a case study, which we change every single year. So just to keep everyone on their toes, so this year's case study was a strategic observation of the Emirates airline, where 4 or 5 students break into a group and provide some analysis and ultimately a presentation to a board of directors from the Emirates airline, obviously played by some KPMG staff. We don't have a budget to fly those guys over from Dubai. And then following that, following that presentation, you'll have a question and answer session with that panel as well. And then an opportunity to meet with one of our partners one-on-one. So kind of a mini interview, I suppose, so that you've got that opportunity to get your skills across in that scenario. And obviously to ask plenty of questions of us as well. So very much a two-way process. And then looking, in good KPMG style, we also like to finish the day with a relatively informal part of the process. So after you've been on an office tour to look around your potential future work surroundings, we'll always have a drinks function at the end so that you get to meet the graduates that started the year before you might have joined, and some other people from around the business as well, so that you will encounter probably 30 or 40 people in one of the larger offices, and certainly a dozen or 20 in some of the smaller offices, to give you the best opportunity to make your decision as to whether you're going to join us as well. Yeah, so look, the best way to prepare for an assessment centre is definitely just to be really, really open-minded. So I think you're going to get a lot of different components to different assessment days. So that the biggest thing that you can do is practice. So get involved in case competitions at university. The second biggest thing you can do is make sure you're well read and you can have an opinion on whatever case or assessment material you might face. So the example I'd give of that is we've used a number of different cases. So we've used a sporting case reasonably recently, we used an airline case reasonably recently, and we've used a case on fracking in the Arctic as well. So there's a diverse range of topics that you will get. So if you can read the Business Herald, if you can read the NBR, if you can read Harvard Business Review, you're going to be able to form an opinion pretty quickly on the kind of assessments that you're going to get through the day. So that would be my top tip. I think the biggest thing is to be authentic. So the reason that we run assessment days is so that we can recruit a diverse number of people into the organisation. So we're not necessarily only going to recruit the people who lead their group during an assessment day. We're not going to necessarily just recruit the people that are the solid numerical and analytical people in their group. So the best thing to do is be the best version of yourself that you possibly can be. So if you are the diligent person that takes minutes and adds really, really relevant insight, but it's pretty rare, then be the best version of that you can be. If you do want to lead the group, then pick up the reins and do that. But it's really just to be comfortable and to get as comfortable as you can to give us the best version of yourself on the day. I think always err on the side of conservatism when you're attending an assessment day, unless you're told that a particular business has got a dress code and they give you really, really solid guidelines. I'd always be going in business attire. You can always, dispense with your tie or your jacket, but you can't magic up a suit if you've decided that you're going to turn up in jeans and a t-shirt. So some other things to think about during an assessment centre, I think, is you're being assessed the whole time. So even when you're in those informal settings, perhaps with the previous year's graduates, or you're having a lunch or a drink at the end of the day, you're still being assessed at that point. It's still part of the decision-making process. Number two is it's your chance to assess the firm. So really make sure that you're taking in whether or not you want to work there as well. It's your opportunity to assess the organisation that you're attending the assessment day at. And the third thing is to definitely be authentic throughout the day. You're there for at least 3 or 4 hours. If you try and fake it, the organisation will know. So yeah, be authentic throughout the day. The key thing is really that your CV is a narrative of your experience. So a top tip that I would have when it comes to just preparing your CV and getting ready is when you've got your first draft is try and narrate your own CV from start to finish as if it's a story. And if you can join all of those components up, then your CV is going to make sense, flow, and be interesting for the reader. So in the digital age, I think the length of a CV has become slightly less important because of the way that we consume that kind of media. But I think as a graduate particularly, 2 to 3 pages should be absolutely sufficient to cover everything that you want in your CV. But it's a little bit like reading a book. If there's a good book that's 100 pages long, you'll read it. If it's 200 pages long and it's good, you'll read it. But if it's 10 pages long and it's rubbish, you won't. Skills sections in CVs for me personally are absolutely a no. I've very rarely seen a skills section pulled off. Far better to demonstrate your skills within the experience that you have, whether that's work experience, whether that's university projects, whether that's involvement in clubs or voluntary organisations. It's absolutely the best way to display a skill, is to show where you've demonstrated it rather than a massive list. Personal statements and career objectives in CVs, I think, often waste space in your CV. Certainly from a career objective perspective, you're going to often have written a cover letter, or you're going to be applying for a specific job, so it's relatively clear what your career objective is going to be. And as for a personal statement, similar to skill sections, very rarely do we see unique personal statements or personal statements that really bring a CV to life. So personally, I would omit that from your CV and concentrate more on the skills and attributes that you're looking to display to an employer. Referees on CVs, I think the best thing that you can do is just have that referees are available upon request. That gives you the opportunity when you're asked for referees to ask the firm what they're looking to gain from the referencing process. Might allow you to choose which referees you provide, and they might be able to give the context that the organisation is looking for, and also as a courtesy to the referee, that particularly during a busy graduate recruitment period, they might get numerous phone calls, so always best to be able to prepare them personally that they might be getting a call from an employer. I think 3 other things for a CV would be: number 1, really use solid examples, utilising the STAR method, so situation, task, action, result, to display skills in your CVs. It sounds as if it's pretty difficult to do, but you can absolutely incorporate those into a 3-sentence answer, which is far more valuable than a list. Number 2 tip for CVs would be no experience is irrelevant. So a lot of candidates will omit experience in, for example, hospitality or retail from their CV. It can display some really, really good skills, so make sure that it's in there. And the third tip is really understand what your CV is going to be used for. It's going to be potentially a script for part of your interview, so make sure you can join all of the components of your CV together into a narrative. cover letter really should be no more than 1 page, and I think any longer than that, then you risk losing the reader's interest. In my opinion, the best structure for a cover letter is a really simple structure, and that should really explain why you want to work for the organisation that the cover letter applies to, and how you are going to fit your personal brand with theirs. So 2 really key concepts. The three real key things that I think students should know about cover letters is don't use it as an opportunity to regurgitate your resume, because otherwise all you're doing is providing a resume of a resume. So yeah, we often see people highlight their key skills through the cover letter, which we then get in their resume as well. So that would be number 1. Number 2 would be absolutely that you have to tailor the cover letter to the organisation. And look, we know from experience that that shouldn't just be as simple as taking the person's name out and replacing it with the name of the person at a different organisation and the name of their organisation. It needs to be unique to that individual organisation. And the third one is really try not to waffle in your cover letter. Make it respectful, make it succinct, but those are the 2 things that it really should be. In preparing for an interview, I don't think you can ever over-prepare. I think the key thing is to really make sure that you have done your basic research, but that's not necessarily to be able to regurgitate that to the organisation. It's really so you feel comfortable when you're there. And then the second element is really to just practice how you're going to answer particular questions, and use your CV as the skeleton for that. So what I mean by that is be able to anticipate some of the questions that you might get asked for on your CV, and then be able to just turn those into bite-sized chunks that you can deliver in an interview, and practice is the key for that. Behavioural questions I've been using interview processes for a number of years now, and they're designed for us to be able to look at your past performance as an indication of your future performance. So typical behavioural questions will start with tell me a time that you have, or describe to me how you. So what we're looking for there with a behavioural answer is for you to display how you approached a particular situation or task, the actions that you took as an individual to rectify or solve that particular problem or task, and then as important as those actions is a result, so that you can demonstrate that displays that particular behaviour or competency that you're being asked to do. My 2 favourite interview questions are pretty broad actually. So the first one is that I really like to just ask someone to talk me through their experience and through their CV, and let them see, or let me see where they go with that particular story. And I think that the key for that as a student is that what you're trying to do when you go through your CV is give the interviewer some things that they can follow up on, and some interest points for them to be able to probe a little bit deeper. So it's a real balance between too much detail and giving them what I would call a hook to come back and ask you another relevant question that allows you to really shine in that interview and show some of the skills and attributes you've had. The second one would just be what you're proudest of and how did you achieve it, whether that's academic or outside of your academic performance. It just shows again what makes a person potentially tick. So my best tip for answering a tricky question is never ever refuse a glass of water at an interview, because having a glass of water gives you an opportunity to pick it up, take a sip, take 10 seconds to compose yourself when you get asked that really difficult question, and buy yourself some time. I think when you then do find a question particularly tricky, the key is not to panic, and to understand that what the interviewer is looking for potentially when they ask you a tricky question is not necessarily what the answer is, but how you approach and how your mind works in coming up with that answer. So a little bit like a maths problem, it's not like getting the right answer is the most important thing. It's about showing you're working out and how you got there, that the interviewer is potentially looking for if they do try and stump you with a tricky or difficult question. Asking questions at the end of an interview is really, really important, and there isn't one specific thing that we could suggest that you ask. Asking questions at the end of an interview is your opportunity to find out everything that you want to know from that organisation. If I were to give a tip to students about what questions they should ask or how they should ask questions, is that I would write down every question that you want answered in an interview before you go in, and ask the interviewer if you can refer to some questions that you'd pre-prepared, and recognise that they may have answered some of those throughout the interview process. So you can say, look, you've answered a number of these questions for me, but I do have a list. Do you mind if I ask questions from a list? And if any interviewer says, no, I need them off the top of your head, probably tells you a little bit about their organisation. I think that the world is getting a little bit more relaxed in terms of business dress, but I still think that for an interview, you can never go wrong with erring on the side of caution and being relatively conservative. So your interviewer may or may not turn up in a suit and tie or business attire, but you can, and it's not going to go to your detriment in 99% of situations. Three things about an interview would be to be on time. It sounds really basic, but don't arrive any earlier than 10 minutes before your interviewer or your interview, because that can panic the interviewer if they've either got back-to-back interviews that day or they may have another meeting that they're running from. Knowing that you're in reception 45 minutes earlier is not helpful, so be on time. The second thing I think is to really work on your first impressions. So that includes your handshake. So again, it sounds like a basic component, but I would say 80% of handshakes look a little bit limp and on occasions a little bit slimy because you are nervous. So make sure you practice, and a good tip for handshakes is try and squeeze the other person's hand about 4 out of 10 in terms of pressure. So not bone crushing, but not like a wet fish either. And the third thing I think is really to make sure that you close your interview with some questions. So the biggest thing for me as an interviewer, if someone doesn't have questions for me, that tells me that they're not really the right fit and as interested in the role as they should be. Preparing for video interviews is an interesting one because they are really unnatural. You're talking to a screen that doesn't give you any response as to whether or not you're answering in the right way or no feedback from another party. The best way to prepare is to practice, and what I would suggest in terms of the way that you practice is get one of your friends, and it probably needs to be one of your really good friends, to stand behind the camera on your tablet or your laptop or your home computer, and undertake one of the practice interviews, but get them to give you some cues behind the camera as to whether or not they're finding what you're saying engaging or funny or dull. So if it's not particularly great, get them to look at their fingernails or look at their watch. If they're really enjoying what you're saying, get them to nod and give you some acknowledgement, and that'll just help you to practice how unnatural it might feel, and then hopefully when you get to the real interview you can be relatively natural in what is an unnatural situation. Showing your personality is twofold in a video interview for me. So number one, and the reason that we use video interviews in our process, is that it gives you an opportunity to show something that previously we wouldn't have been able to see, which is how you might interact with us one-on-one before we get to that interview or assessment stage of the process. And that really gives you the opportunity to get across your non-verbal communication skills. So 65% of all communication is non-verbal. So video interview allows us to see how you might use your hands when you talk. It allows us to see where you get a little bit excited or enthusiastic about a particular topic. So those are the things that will come through, I think, from a personality perspective in your video interview. The second component for us is we do actually give you a specific question which allows you to talk about anything that you want in your video interview. So that is where you can practice what we'd refer to as your elevator pitch, and an opportunity for you to talk for a couple of minutes about anything that you want. And hopefully that's the opportunity that you get to get your personality or your passions across in that process. If you encounter technology issues with the video interview, with our platform, there is immediately a support help desk number and email that you can log your issues with the provider. And then we'd also ask you to email the recruitment team and say, hey, just tried to log in and do my video interview. I've had some technical issues. Can you please resolve this? And in most occasions, we'll then send out a revised link for you to start the process again. But look, the technology is improving, so we've used it for 3 years now and get far less issues the longer and longer we use the platform. There is a little bit of a cheat to this, I think, with what you wear for a video interview. So because you're normally only going to see the top half of your body, you can wear your board shorts or your jeans, but just make sure that the top half is as it would be for an interview. So yeah, again, err on that side of conservatism with your dress. Certainly, you should be wearing a business shirt if you're a guy, or your smart top if you're a girl. And again, that's just really because you should err on the side of caution rather than get something wrong from an interview attire perspective. Video interviewing has come up with a couple of funny stories actually. So there was one guy who had a pizza delivered about 5 minutes into his video interview. So the doorbell was going, the door was being knocked, his mobile phone was ringing, so he got up, paid the pizza delivery guy, and then came back and completed his interview and apologised at the end. So we give 2 minutes at the end of the interview for people to add some comments. He just apologised for his double hot pepperoni turning up halfway through. And probably the second one was where someone realised that their flatmate had actually been in the background for the first 3 or 4 minutes of their interview, unfortunately wearing their underwear, lying on the couch, obviously watching a bit of TV. So they moved in order to change the background for the second half of their interview. Video interviews for us are viewed by a number of people. So the first view is normally by the recruitment team, and that's really just to check that all the content's there, to check that the sound and the technology's worked really, really well, and to make sure that the video interview performance probably matches the person's written application. At that stage, we forward those on to the partner group and the management group for that particular service line, and they will normally sit together in a room and review them. On occasions, if you've got multiple viewers in multiple locations, they may need to log in and watch them themselves, but 2 stages to that process. 3 tips for video interviews. Number 1, and this only really relates to our process because it's the only one that I can talk completely knowledgeably about, is that we give you plenty of time to prepare or to think about your answers to questions. So you get at least a minute in between when you see what the question is and when you need to start recording your answer. So tip 1 is a minute is a long time to make a 3 or 4 bullet point script for how you're going to answer the question. Tip 2 is that you can have your CV with you so that you can refer to it. So again, just make sure you're not reading off it verbatim, but it can absolutely be there for some guidance. And then number 3 is just please make sure that you've turned off mobile phones, iPads, laptops, doorbells, all the kind of things that are going to distract you, because you do only get one opportunity to record your video interview, and once it's started, you can't stop it. So make sure you're in an environment where you've got 15 to 20 minutes to make sure you can complete it in complete quiet. The only way to prepare for psychometric testing is to practice it. You can find out from employers which particular platform they use, and then if you just Google practice Opera or Pegasus questions in our case, or practice SHL testing for other organisations, you'll get a raft of Google hits for that, and you just need to log on and you need to practice them. You can improve your performance significantly by just understanding the way that the questions are going to be asked and the way that your mind needs to work to answer them. Speed and accuracy are both important when it comes to looking at psychometric test results. So when we review, we do look at your hit rate, so that's how many questions you get through, but we also certainly look at the accuracy of those answers as well. So it's a balance between how many you get right and how quickly you get them right. So you should be focusing on both, unfortunately. We don't have a pass mark for our psychometric, or more aptly our verbal and numeric and abstract reasoning tests. I know that organisations do have benchmarks. For us, it's a blended part of the recruitment process, so there's no yes or no gate with our testing, but it does form a component of the overall decision. So testing forms one component of our overall assessment process, and the one thing that I would say that we do is we look at all of the elements of your application in conjunction with each other at every stage in the process. So when all we've got is your CV and your transcripts, that's all we can look at. When we've then got your video interview and your testing results, we still go back and look at your CV and your transcript in conjunction with those to make a really, really well-rounded decision. And similarly, when we get to the end of the process and it's an assessment day and it's some interview feedback and some networking feedback, we're still going back and looking at all of the evidence that we've got to make a decision. So it forms an important part, but it's not the be-all and end-all of any recruitment process with us. So 3 other things for testing is just practice, practice and practice. There's probably one big do and one big don't. So we'll start with the don't, and that's don't have a public profile on any social media platform that you wouldn't want a potential employer to see. So really make sure that you've looked at your privacy settings of all of your social media. As employers, we now have the tools to be able to aggregate your online presence and look at it all. So please make sure that if you don't want us to see something, it's not in the public domain. From a do perspective, I think the biggest do is do have a LinkedIn profile, and there are some real key things that you can do on your LinkedIn profile, which I'm sure we'll come on to. So LinkedIn is a really valuable platform, I think, for all professionals. And the absolute best way that you can leverage LinkedIn, particularly as a student, is to participate. And what I mean by that is there's lots of people that you can follow. So that can be individual influencers, it can be organisations. So if you pick the people that you really want to hear about, what it tells an employer is the type of things that you're interested in, and the type of way that that you tick. And that can be really, really important for an employer to kind of understand whether or not they're going to be able to probably provide you with some of the things that you're looking for from a career development perspective when they understand the kind of influences that you've got on your professional life, even at a really, really early stage. And look, basics as well, just really make sure you've got a solid LinkedIn photo that's professional rather than social media. And you'll have the ability to get those taken at career expos and all kinds of events throughout the year. So go and see a LinkedIn photo booth or a professional to get that done if you possibly can. So three tips about social media. I think be proactive. So if you're involved on social media and you want to comment on something, get involved in the discussion, particularly on something like LinkedIn, where there's plenty of groups that you can participate in. So share your opinion. It will help you through formulating answers for questions in interviews, or formulating the way that you might want to interact in an assessment centre. So it's a good and really safe practice ground for you to make comments on things that are potentially in the business sector. Number two, I think, is really to take that time to consolidate your online presence as you go into that job hunt stage, and lock your privacy profiles down, so that your Facebook does become separate, or your Instagram becomes separate from your professional persona. And look, I think a third thing is don't be scared to leverage social media to reach out to contacts in the business community. If you personalise a LinkedIn request to someone with a reason that you want to connect with them, it will be really, really well received. But similarly, don't just spam every single employer without some context for why you're doing that, and damage your network.